I would say, Enoch and those type of signs, they're they should be getting us to ask what's going on. Why are we seeing these things? What are the changes that are happening? How can we cooperate with what God is doing? How do we stop living out of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and look at what are kingdom values? Jesus really made it clear the kingdom of God was not a political system. He warned of the leaven of Herod and Pharisees. Don't get into the religious and political systems because they are to be feared and discouraged from infiltrating and ruling our lives. So there's a different system. This kingdom was not of this world in the same way as we see a political system. His kingdom is about God's rule, and God's rule is about establishing love, and so that people would love one another. Jesus didn't tell people to go out and form political parties and change the governments of the world. He told people to love one another as he had loved them. Well, that was a hallmark of the early church. They started to love one another, care for people, care for the widows and the orphans, and look after people. Take in those people that no one else wanted. They started to change society until the religious and political spirit took over. And then you had the Dark Ages, all controlled by sort of this system that favored religion and politics effectively. Now we need to make sure we're not operating in the same way. So it's a difficult one in that you can't immediately say, well, here's the answer. But God is showing, I think, that there are things we need to be questioning our cooperation in that, and questioning whether the Western mindset that is based on stable government and economy is actually going to prolong or shorten what is happening. And I think people should be asking God, what are the questions I should be asking? What should my thinking be looking at? And establishing God's kingdom is not a religious kingdom. It's not a political kingdom. What is it? It's God demonstrating his love so that people come into agreement and harmony with God and God's heart. Well, that will change the world. It changed things dramatically when people were following God's heart in the past. And every time you get God moving in some way, it changes, but there was no lasting change in what we call revivals or other things. I mean, you get history of some of these things that were pretty amazing stories of things that happened. The Hebridean revival, when people were drawn to come and, all these amazing things were going on. Well, look at the Hebrides now. It's as if nothing ever happened. The Welsh revival, when things were so dramatic, the pubs shut, everything stopped, the pit ponies wouldn't obey their masters because there was no swearing at them. I mean, it was literally like things for 3 or 4 years, massive change. Then things come in, things get spoiled, jealousies, man-made stuff, the whole thing. Now you look in Wales, at the end of the day, you can't see any evidence of that other than a load of empty chapels. So why didn't it happen? Why didn't it? Because it never sustained from generation to generation. Now, there were reasons for that. First World War, for what was one, wiped out a whole load of the men who were affected by the Welsh revival. But it did spread. It went around the world. You had Azusa Street as a result of that and others that came out of that. But it didn't last. So we need something. It isn't just a quick fix, but how is it going to change things in a progressive way? And I think it's going to require people who begin to manifest heaven in their lives on earth and begin to be not living according to the systems that we are all under and we'll all come under. And of course, that's not going to be an easy transition. But there are signs that I think are pointing to change and things which are quite like, who would have thought the far right would have a chance of ruling France? I mean, it's just like, hey, you were invaded by fascists, and now you're wanting a fascist government. I mean, it's like, see, but it's like, wow, this is really quite challenging. But that's a sign that people are just not happy. They're not happy with the status quo, with what's going on. So, and I think more and more countries, what's it done? It's driven the others to come work together. Because, like, we don't want this lot in here espousing their racist and other views and things like that. And we've got a similar little thing in the UK where there's certain things that are happening that is like quite sort of more right wing. And it's like, we've got to be careful that we don't become xenophobic and racist and, well, I don't want these people here in my country. Well, we're all one family. And I think that is a big change that needs to take place. We are one family, the children of God. Doesn't matter what color skin we've got, where we were born, and anything else. We're one family from God's perspective. He sees none of us in any different way. He loves everyone the same. Therefore, how are we going to actually start thinking that way? And do we ask the question in our own life, am I in any way prejudiced? Do I have a thinking that is deeper down, that comes out at times, which does not reflect God's heart of love for people? And I think it's worth us looking and shining the light to see what is in our hearts so that our hearts can be purified and refined in a way that removes all of that so we can be one family. That we're not, well, I want to stick with my tribe. Tribalism is not family, and God does not like tribalism. And as soon as you get a tribe that says, well, we're the tribe, it then immediately says the rest of people, well, they're not part of our tribe. They don't fit, they don't belong. Look at that over. I mean, as in the US, you were known for receiving people from all over the world. In fact, your country is based on immigration. When you look at it, where did all the people come from? From all over. Italians, Irish, English. I mean, it started out mostly English, and then you got some French in there. You got some Germans in there. You've got all of these people, who came over, wanted to, go out west and take land and build something, and all this stuff is built on that pioneering sense of whatever. And now it's like, well, yeah, but now we don't have anyone else in. And I agree, you just can't just basically take anybody in anything. It's got to be a sense, but what's the philosophy behind it? What's behind it? Is it financial? Is it racial? What are behind some of the thinking about immigration? And we've got this thing in the UK. There's a big thing about immigration. We don't want these boat people coming over here. Well, why'd they want to come over in the first place? Because they think it's going to be a better place, because of the place they're living right now. And it's like, well, can we handle that? Well, we should be able to manage it correctly and properly without a xenophobic racial aspect to it, and therefore there's got to be a change in how we view certain issues. And I like to look at what are the big political issues going on around the world, because that is where often you see the tension and the conflicts. And I think it's highlighting the areas where God is saying, we need to look at yourselves. You need to look at, why is this an issue? Why will people vote for one person to keep other people out of the country? You know, why is that such a priority for them? Now, if you live on the border or whatever, you might have a completely different view if you live up the border with Canada. You know, that you probably don't have a fear that the Canadians are all going to come into the US. And they're probably like, oh, we don't want any of the US into Canada. Thank you very much. You know, so you got all of this borders and boundaries that are creating something which is not God's heart. God is not nationalistic, and I don't think wants nationalistic things, you know, patriotism and all this stuff. Well, what has all that done? Created wars, fights over territory. It's so far from family, you know. And you could say, you know, it's a very sort of utopianistic thinking and idealistic thinking. Well, if we're not idealistic, how's anything going to change? We might need to be pragmatic when it comes to changing things, but actually idealism presents a different view and opportunities for something better. You know, my ideal would be God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. What's that going to look like? If you enjoy these videos, would you please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe? It really does help. Thank you very much.